I will, before we go any further, say that I have put on a special outfit for today. So I don't know whether you can see. I've got on
Oh,
my Be Her Freedom t-shirt,
love
which
it.
says that ignorance is not bliss.
That's
And
awesome.
I love that shirt and I wear it proudly. And we'll circle back to talk about some of the things that you do and of which the t-shirt is a part.
Yeah.
But now that we've got most people online now and we're feeling centered and calm. Uh, Thank you for joining me, Melody. So good to
Oh,
see you.
so good to see you too. I made myself a cuppa, so it feels like we're just having a cuppa as normal, but
Yes.
yeah, via the line.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, you contributed a story to the latest volume of the Shears Project, and I will say up front, it's an incredible story. For those of you who have still not bought the book to read the stories, what are you waiting for? But Melody's story is it's really courageous and very vulnerable, and I think an absolute gift. And I, when I put together this latest volume, I did personally approach a few people. Some of the stories were people that I had encountered, but I approached Melody because we've been friends for a while, and I knew that there were many more stories to be shared. I didn't expect the one that you submitted, to be honest. I was like, wow, this is really brave of you. And it that story and previous conversations we've had, and I know in times when you've shared from any sort of platform, you've talked about how much a part of your journey, this fight for freedom in your own sense of identity, how much of a role that's played in your journey. And certainly that's highlighted in the most recent story. But can you take us back to the early years
Yeah,
and
sure.
give us a little bit of the backstory of who you are and why identity has become so important to who you are?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, that's a big question. You'll be here
Yeah.
all day. um, I think identity for anybody, and the older I get, the more I realize the more complicated it is. It's unpacking every single day and looking back at the past and then looking at the present and looking at the future and going, well, what actually makes us who we are? And,
Mm,
it's funny, I was really nervous about this conversation. I think part of it is because, what I love about your book, especially this one, is our stories are never done fully. And so
mm,
I was like, I would love to get up here and be like, this amazing thing happened. And I felt I'm so sure of myself and this is all, but I don't have that story. I have stories of God's goodness throughout my
mm,
life in looking for my identity through him and then, in my own ways and where that's kind of led me. But it's,
mm.
it's a continuous journey. And so, I think this year in particular, it's been a really crazy year. I feel like it's the year of the unpacking of a lot of that stuff,
Oh,
and, at the beginning of this year, before COVID and before everything kind of happened, I had kind of got to a point in my life where I was like, I'm going to stop. I'm going to
mm,
literally just have a look back. And I've done that multiple times throughout my life. Significant moments where I've just thought things have to change and
mm.
literally just shifted gears hugely.
Wow.
And this year was one of those ones, but more of a ripping off of a band-aid of going, okay,
Wow.
um, from the outset, I've been so blessed. Like literally, our life is amazing, and we are so lucky. But underneath, you start peeling back the layers, and stuff that you don't deal with is always
Mm,
still there. And so, yes, at the beginning of this year, I kind of booked in my first real kind of counselling sessions, and was like, okay, I'm just going to look
wow.
this thing straight in the face and rip off the band-aid, and then, a few months later, COVID happened, and all my securities in what I did and who I thought
Mm,
everything kind of just was confronted. But that journey of just looking back on your childhood and, right from the beginning and just going, where was my identity formed has been huge for me. And
mm,
what role does that play, moving forward to the next decade. So I guess for me, I think the funny thing that happens to everyone, I turned 40 this year and I was like, okay, like I remember when I turned 30 and I thought I was really old and that literally I was like, I've got to change my life, and literally did. Like I just put down you know, some of the women's magazines that I was reading that weren't good for my sense of self, and I picked up good books and I put myself in right situations. And I remember literally having a drunken hot tub on my 30th birthday with some friends and saying, where do you want to see yourselves in 5 years? And me just going, not here, and
Wow.
changing my life. And I guess the next decade is that. But at the root of it, and when I wrote this story for you, was this sense of identity fuels everything. And I think it does for all of us, but we just don't talk about it enough. Yeah. So I guess going back, my identity from a young age, you know, I've come from a beautiful family, but a broken family. Both my parents have their own stories of heartbreak and different things that influenced my life. But I think, you know, coming from an environment that was quite often volatile, but at the same time being placed in a Christian sheltered school, I always felt like the odd kid out. And to be honest, I always have. And so I think from an early age for me, I sort of tried to find my place in, I don't know, just I'm trying to find my place, you know, trying to fit in. And I was reflecting back on it thinking, you know, nothing huge happened in my life, but I remember picking boyfriends purely off the credit it would give me, and it would make me feel normal. I remember having a, you know, really strong relationship with the Lord, but just craving the roast dinner with the family, craving the security. And you know, at the time moving out with my boyfriend and feeling like, oh well, it goes against my belief system and how I'd been raised, but at least I'll fit in. And just kind of being driven by this sense of just wanting to fit. And I think over the last nearly 40 years, God's shown me that we're not called to fit in. You know, the things that I've despised, He's used in my life, where I don't feel like I fit. When I've lent on Him, my identity in Him is really actually quite strong. It's just when I lose sight of Him that it's, you know, looking to the left or the right and around you and just looking for security, I guess. But I guess, you know, He has kind of become my security. And, you know, I really can't credit much more than that to literally leaning on Him to find my identity. But it has been a journey. It's been an unpacking. This year has certainly been an unpacking of all the things that I thought made me who I was, and actually going deeper.
Yeah. Oh, well, I appreciate your bravery and your honesty, not just being honest with yourself, but also having the courage to give other people, you know, an insight into that journey. And it's certainly shaped some of the decisions that you've made in where you've invested your time and your energy and your talent. And I just think it's a really fascinating parallel that in your own quest for individual freedom to be the person that you are discovering that you are, that along the way you became a freedom fighter for others in, I guess, for what some people, you know, a lot of people may not realize that you live in Tasmania. And not that that is the end of the world, but, you know, Tasmania, it's not the mainland, yet from Tasmania you have launched and initiated, and now you can tell me how many years strong you are, but what has become an organisation with a global influence and reach, as a mum of young children living in Tassie. So can you tell me how that stirring in your own heart, that it's been part of your journey, you know, for as long as you can remember, of finding fit, of finding identity, how that led you to establish Be Her Freedom?
Yeah, sure. I think I mentioned it in the article that I wrote. I remember at a really significant time in my life, I think I was 22, walking into a church after years of not being around church at all, and just having this sense of feeling lost. And I remember writing in my Nokia phone, the only reason I was there is my girlfriend's boyfriend had broken up with her, and she kind of tricked me to come along for support. But I remember writing in my phone, like literally like the week before my parents had gotten divorced, my boyfriend of 5 years had dumped me.
Wow.
I was in the middle of my master's degree at uni, and like, it's hilarious. I was actually writing it on Sex in the City now, and I think, oh my gosh, like, what the heck? um, but I just remember being like, you know, just overwhelmed and writing in my little Nokia phone at the time, which I actually hadn't had my own phone the whole time I'd been in that previous relationship. So the only way to talk to me during my from 18 till
Wow.
about 22 was through my boyfriend's phone. And so he
Wow.
had left me, and you know, I do have a history of rejection in my family, and so that was kind of a crucial moment. And I wrote in my phone, freedom is only a step away. I don't know why, I just wrote it and I made it my screensaver. And I just remember that whole service just feeling the sense of there's more, I know there's more, but being afraid of that. And anyway, fast forward, you know, a few years later, I met my husband, Jake, in that church service. At the time, I was like, I'm not going to go out with anybody. Like, I'm so sick of this. I had a boyfriend the minute I was 13 until then. I'd been in a relationship, and I was like, no, I'm just going to, you know, I'm sick of being played. I'm going to play him, like, as you say, when you're that age. And anyway, 18 months later, we're married. And he's from Tasmania, and so I found myself, you know, weirdly living in Tasmania. And at the time, it was a bit of an adventure. We were going to come here for a year, so the plan was, he was a teacher. We were going to come here for a year. I just kind of wanted to get away from my hometown and thought I'd be back. Anyway, we moved here, and he wanted to do real estate. And I remember someone saying over us on the way here on the boat that you'll be really successful here, but you need to keep it about God. And I just was like, okay, whatever. And I remember the first 5 years of living here, hating it. Like, I hated it so much.
Wow.
I had, you know, trained as a journalist. My dream was to work in women's magazines. I actually had worked in women's magazines, but my heart was always to help the poor and needy. My heart was always to do social work. But again, this sense of identity was like, I remember feeling really good about myself, that, you know, the girl from downtown Unanderra, which is a rough suburb, was working at Clio magazine, you know, and having a real, but hating it. You know, I just don't even care about this stuff. But that real pull between, so I moved from there to Tassie, and felt a little bit like, wow, like I ended up working in my husband's dad's rental company on the phones, which I was terrible at. Like, I had literally like a pile of magazines next to me, and I just like hate answering the phone and feeling like, what happened to this career that I'd studied for, and all of that stuff. And like I mentioned, on my 30th birthday, like, we had kind of got into this bad pattern of just kind of drinking and just partying a bit, and I don't know, it was getting more full on. And on my 30th birthday, I was like, I just want to shift things. And that fight in me that I've always known there is more, always, kind of arose up in me. And that following year, I went to Colour Conference, which is a women's conference, and, you know, you and I have caught up there, and I just saw Bobby Houston speaking, and for the first time I just saw this woman who was fashionable and kind of ditzy but really powerful in the Lord. And I'd never seen that before, like, I'd never. And then all these women after women kept getting up, and you know, they were bold in their faith, but they weren't the kind of, you know, pastors' wives that I had imagined. And I felt this sense of, wow, there's more. And then Christine Kane got up and talked about A21 and human trafficking, and it just broke my heart. And I think in that moment, my own search for freedom and identity, when you hear about stories of other women and children and, you know, men that are trafficked, and, you know, I was a young mom, and my heart just broke, and it kind of paled in significance. And yes, I kind of came home, and at the time I'd been seeking God, and I'd been reading lots of stuff and really wanting to change my life anyway. And I just came back and got my Brave on and started a little high tea, and just prayed that God would help me. And, you know, I didn't really have that huge group. I had the mums from school, but anyway, God blessed it. Like, it just grew. And in that journey of, you know, fighting for freedom of others, I kind of found my voice. I found my confidence in God. The things that I thought mattered, like appearance or this, you know, my success in working for a magazine, all this stuff that I thought mattered didn't matter. And every time I kind of would get into a bit of a self-pity moment, you just read the stories, you just see what you're doing, and it puts it in perspective. But alongside that as well, like, God just blessed it. Like, it was, I don't even have a reason why. Like, people say, you know, how did you grow your Instagram, all this stuff. I don't know. I didn't even know how to use it. Like, God just, it just grew, and people just started attending our events, and then they would sell out, and, you know, it went from 100 people to 1,000 people, and just miracle after miracle kept happening. And my focus shifted, you know. So I don't know. And in all of that, you know, I've found my own sense of identity, you know, pushing yourself when you're standing up for the rights of someone else.
Yeah.
You don't think about, I feel too tired that day to stand up. I feel too shy that day to show up. I feel too sick that day. You think of the people that you're trying to help, and you just show up.
Yeah.
The thought of not showing up is a person who may not be helped,
Wow.
you know, or someone who may not be inspired, and I think that's been a huge driving factor. And I totally think that's the way God works, you know, in fighting for the freedom of the others. You do find your own sense of freedom and your own sense of self in Him. And the times when I've tried to do it on my own, when I've gotten a bit cocky, or I'm like, yeah, I know how to run events, they've fallen flat on their face.
Wow.
You know, and so it's that humility that comes alongside it, which, you know, God's teaching me. And I think my journey to this point, you know, sharing about some of the vulnerabilities that I've had personally hasn't been about the exterior, and it's actually been about just pulling aside those things that hold you back internally and just being vulnerable. Some of our greatest, you know, some of the greatest moments I've had in working with Be Hers has just been being really real.
Yeah.
And people just get it, you know. You know, I've gone from, you know, from a size 8 to a size 16 and back to an 8 and like 100 times, and just showing up at a size 16 and being confident for someone who's been, you know, surrounded by this pressure in fashion and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's just taught me what matters and what doesn't.
I'm so impressed by it, so much of what, I mean, everything that you've done. And I feel as an outsider, like observing your journey, that it's beautiful to see how everything that you had put your hand to before Be Her Freedom, that the skills and experience that you had from that, that they have just found their perfect fit
Yeah.
in what you're doing. And so nothing that we do is ever wasted if we're prepared to humble ourselves and give it to God to use. And you are such a shining example of that. But speaking of that journey, and I'm so grateful that you're so honest about that. You know, I've been a size 8, I've been a size 16 many times.
I have every size in my cupboard if anyone wants to borrow clothes. I'm like a shop.
Because for a lot of us, we're on that journey, but we don't really talk about it. We sort of try and pretend we live in our own sense of denial because there's shame around that. And even though intellectually we tell ourselves, that's not who I am, I'm more than that, it does become quite a strong driving force in our behavior and our openness to communicate and put ourselves in situations where that might be commented on or observed or judged.
Yeah.
You have walked a journey of, you know, that's been quite harrowing with chronic illness that a lot of people are probably unaware of, that amongst all of the success and the hard work that Be Hers involves, that you've been on your own battle of having to deal with unfolding, you know, diagnoses and conditions. How have you held the tension between this massive vision and the day-to-day reality of you sometimes not having the energy to get out of bed because of your chronic, you know, health conditions?
Yeah. Look, I think it's an ongoing journey. You know, we can't control what has been handed to us, and what's been handed to me is different than other people. And, you know, other people have it far worse, and not to take away from my own journey. But I think perspective, like, I actually do think for me, doing Be Hers has been a massive lifesaver in some ways for me, because I run a little bit off adrenaline. It's not good. Like my friend and I were joking about it yesterday, saying that she's helping her sister with a wedding and her wedding dress didn't arrive. And we got in this weird panic, happy panic that we're going to solve the problem and find her a dress. And we're like, we have this sick disease that we love the adrenaline of events and things. And so I think for me, that's been a blessing and a curse. Running Be Hers, my passion for it has been amazing, but I've pushed myself and shown up maybe when I shouldn't have, and rest not and pushed in my own strength, but then at the same time, in doing so, just so many miracle stories. I often think, oh, I just wish I'd written them down, because it's just miracle after miracle, in amongst the chronic fatigue, in amongst the sickness, in amongst the days where I'm just in bed crying my eyes out going, I just can't do this, and then there's a miracle. And I think for me, it's finding the small miracles. I often think, quite often, I'll feel unwell, and I have, it's an ongoing health stuff with me. This weekend I spent the whole time chronically sick in bed, but then to just know that there's something that God's put on your heart that you're fighting for, the adrenaline kind of kicks in for me, and then the miracles happen. So every time I lay it down, every single time, I've just gone, God, I can't do this. Like, I literally, doctors are saying you can't get out of bed, you're not well, you've got to rest. And yes, you do. And I'm learning that you absolutely do. But when I've just laid it down and said, God, I can't do this without your help, miracles have happened. Like, so many crazy things continuously happen that we can't orchestrate, and that make a way for me, and they make it easy for me. So every time that I said I can't do it, God would send someone to me, always. There's so many people, this week, just we've launched our own social enterprise, and I've had so many people just out of the blue, like Alice McCall's fashion designer, call, I want to help you find source patterns. I don't know how to do that. I want to help you. And just constantly things like that, right when I'm exhausted. And in doing so, I guess this is what makes me smile. In doing so, he's using my weakness in some ways to help strengthen their calling. So I'm able to kind of build this team of people that are walking in their own calling out of my weakness, because when I feel like I can do it all, nothing actually miraculous ever happens. It's when you actually lay it down. But it has been a hard slog. I remember Bobby Houston saying that nothing big comes without fight. And I think the fight for me is actually, how do you find freedom when you are stuck to a bed? How do you find freedom in your mind when you're like, why am I not being healed? Like, that's been a big journey for me. I'm doing all the right things. I'm ticking all the right boxes. I'm forgiving every single person I can think of. I'm trying to get to the backbone of it all. I'm being but I'm still unwell. But in it, God is so good, and I'm so grateful for it, because it's teaching me these lessons. And I just have this feeling on a good day, that he's going to use it. My journey with this, being a size 8 to a size 16 and back, like I mentioned, when I was growing up, a big part of my identity came from how I looked. I remember, I was really shy, but in my family, it was a big deal. I remember cutting my lip when I was 10, and my dad literally, genuinely, he probably didn't mean it, but saying her life is over. And everyone genuinely thought my life was over because I had a scar on my face. It was such a big part of my identity. To get that stripped back and to go, I can't, I'm still going to show up, has been amazing. To actually be forced to practice what I preach. I'm saying I'm building this movement of women that, love themselves and value themselves and will fight for the freedom of others. Yet I look in the mirror and hate myself. God stripped that back, and he's used this sickness, or, it's really easy to show up and say, miracles happen every day when you're feeling amazing. But when you're not, and you're struggling, and you can still stand up and say God is faithful, actually that's more powerful. And so, I don't know what that looks like in the future, but I just feel like every day is a decision. And, you can make good decisions, or you can make bad decisions. And I constantly make both, like that.
Well, and sometimes you don't know whether it's a good decision or a bad decision till after you've made it.
Oh, exactly.
And I don't think any of us willingly make a bad decision.
No. but
And
it's in my mind. So what I've realized with my health is that I can still feel chronically sick that day. I can still have a terrible new diagnosis of autoimmune disease. But the way that I start that morning, the way that I look at it, the way that I decide to use that matters,
yeah.
significantly matters. And so it's that decision in the morning, not to get up anyway, or to rest if your body needs to rest, but not to go down this thing, which I've always done, of you're fat, you're ugly, you're sick, you're not going to be healed, you're not well, you're not good enough,
Wow.
all those lies that come into your mind, just actually calling them out. And I found calling them out to other people really kind of stops you in your tracks, because you realize how bad it sounds. So yeah.
I'd love that in all that you've just shared, that that what I'm hearing time and time again is that the powerful presence of God in everything. It's that, Jesus, Emmanuel, God is with us. Is that whether it's in your weakness or your strength, whether it's when you're on a platform or you're at home in bed
Yeah.
with tears in your eyes, that the reality of God in all of those things. And that is such an encouragement, I think, to anybody listening, that the immediacy and the intimacy and the accessibility of God is that he's not just there in our moments of what looks like success, but you're experiencing and encountering him in every element of your life. And he is revealing himself in the most unexpected ways along the way.
Yeah.
Your journey with your appearance that you've talked about, and that really strong connection of identity to the way you present to the world, I think is really powerfully demonstrated in the story that you shared, where you talked about the journey about getting breast implants and then the decision to have them removed. Can
Yeah.
you can you unpack that?
Oh yeah.
Unpack? Can you unpack that bra? Can you
Yeah, well,
can you
I've
can you
actually
share a
got
little
them.
bit about that?
Sure.
Oh,
I actually laughed the other day. I've got them. I kept them as a memento, and so they're sitting in my kitchen cupboard above
oh,
the fridge. And my daughter was looking for Panadol, and she's like, "What are these?" It's like my two big silicone implants. Anyway, it's quite funny, but
wow, I love that,
I
Mel.
I know. Well, actually was a really good way to talk to your 11-year-old daughter about
Yeah,
that. In a, humor kind of softens things. And so I think that's been part of my journey with
yeah,
this in particular. Um, I guess, when I wrote that article, I had written that in my journal. So I remember when I got them out last year, journaling. So basically what I sent you, I'd written in my journal, and I just was able to pull it. And I'd written it down because I had thought story needs to be told.
yeah,
And not in a way that, I don't have any issue with plastic surgery whatsoever. I think for me, the ripping out of, taking out the implants was much deeper than a physical reaction to
yeah,
sickness. It was a ripping out of the roots of this stuff that we're talking about.
yeah.
Even talking to you about this right now, the whole time I had implants for 8 years. No one knew. Well, actually, I thought no one knew, but looking back at photos, I'm like, everyone knew. Like, it was so obvious. And I used to love them, and so it was obvious. But I would never tell anyone because of this sense of shame around it.
Yeah.
This sense of shame that's always kind of followed me my whole life, and so I didn't tell anyone, and I didn't want them to feel. It's funny because I kind of have always felt lesser, but I didn't want them to feel lesser. I didn't want them to then look at me and feel like, oh, no, I don't measure up to that because I haven't got implants. And so I just didn't talk about it. And I think, that's another whole discussion in the world that we live in right now. But so to then come out and share this story has been quite confronting. And I remember saying to someone else, I'm going to share this story. I think God's going to use it. And them saying, well, don't share it. You don't want, and almost like saying, you can't share that because that's too personal. But I think, well, the reason I got them in the first place was because no one was talking about it. But I was just seeing all these images of everybody with perfect chests, thinking, what's wrong with me? I want them to look. And, I just wish people had been more open. But anyways, the journey with that, I'd had my 3 kids. I was feeling pretty insecure. in my body, which is ridiculous again looking back now. Like, I was pretty fit and healthy, but I'd lost a whole lot of weight. You know, you know, I did kind of not need them, but, you know, they were kind of corrective, I guess. And I had felt like I'd always been pretty insecure if like Bondi Rescue came on. Like, I'm like a bit psycho. Like, I'd be insecure if my husband was watching Bondi Rescue, and I'd be thinking, that'll take away that feeling. Like, I won't feel that anymore because I'll look like that. Which is just so ridiculous, because my husband actually really does. This whole journey has actually taught me that he actually really does love me. But in the back of my mind, because of how I've been raised, was it'll just be a matter of time and he'll leave. And so the implants were kind of like, it'll just soften that a little bit. You know, if a sex scene comes on in a movie, it'll soften it, because I won't compare myself. I'll feel like I measure up, and it will fix everything. I'll be able to wear a bikini and all of that stuff. And I did, like, I could wear a bikini confidently. I did feel great. Like, I'm not going to lie, I do miss them. Like, it was much easier to dress. However, the reason why I got them is so unhealthy. Like, that mindset, that didn't change. And you hear a lot of people share these stories about, you know, when they go on these weight loss journeys, but their mind is still, as the overweight person, that didn't shift in me. And so anyway, it was all fine. I forgot about them. And then I started getting sick. And so for the last 8 years, I just, you know, it's one thing after the other. My hair started falling out. I started gaining, like, I gained like 10 kilos. I was a personal trainer at the time. I gained like 10 kilos in a month. I was working out twice a day. I was just in bed all the time, so sick. And no one could say what it was. And so they said, it's your thyroid. And I was like, okay, it's my thyroid. And I had this big goiter on my neck at the time. But then I started getting arthritis through my hands, and so I used to wakeboard all the time. And then all of a sudden I couldn't hold the rope. And so I'd just be skiing and I couldn't hold the rope. My arms would seize up, and to the point where then I couldn't hold the kettle at home. I'd be dropping the kettle. And it got so bad towards the end. So then I got endometriosis and all these just different autoimmune diseases that were kind of triggered. What I felt was triggered by that, because of being so healthy beforehand. And then towards end of last year, I just felt like I couldn't walk up the driveway. I'd feel dizzy. Like, one of the last kind of moments where I was like, I've got to do something, was I just remember gardening in the driveway and falling over dizzy, and my husband had to drive. It's only like 5 meters, had to drive and pick me up and put me in the car and drive me back home. And then I'd just show up in an event and I'd just put on and I'd just be but in the background, all of this was going on. And a few of my friends had sent me these articles on Facebook about this thing called breast implant illness. And I was like, no, I love my boobs. What are you talking about? I spent like 15 grand on these things.
That's right.
But, you know, and I, you know, and I was only a C cup. It wasn't like I went huge. It was literally just to make me feel better. And so I just kept ignoring it. But then the more I started to read, the more I started to think maybe it's got something to do with it. And anyway, so I kind of got desperate, and I went and saw the surgeon, and he was like, convinced me that I'd look terrible, and that, you know, the first question he asked me, and so this is where I just wonder how things happen behind the scenes. The first thing he said to me is, how's your marriage? I said, I want to get them removed. And he said, how's your marriage? It's going to have an impact on your marriage. And keep in mind, I got them in feeling insecure about that. So I just remember sitting in the room thinking, well, I don't care. Like, if my marriage is based off that, then if that's all it's based off, then it's not good.
We got bigger issues.
Exactly. So I booked it in and I got it done. And but it was scary, you know, the unknown fear, and the fear more so for me of what if this is all just made up. And you know, it is a pretty complicated surgery. They get in, they scrape out your rib cage, like they've got to remove all of the capsule that grows around it and all of that. And, you know, good old Google, you get on and you find all these photos of what could happen. But the bigger thing was, what if I do all of this and I still don't get well? You know, what if all of that happens? But during that journey, it was just amazing. You know, I'm still not 100% better. Things have definitely shifted. My chronic fatigue is completely gone. The minute I had them out, I was better. And I was hilarious in the hospital because I was so excited about it. I just kept telling everybody. But other things haven't shifted. But what shifted in me through that journey was just going, God, I will trust you with this, because I know this is part of my story. And it's not just a cutting out of an implant. It's a cutting out of a lie that I've believed my whole life, that what I look like matters, that what I succeed matters, that I have to earn approval, that I should be ashamed of who I am, and I need that cut out because I feel called. Not even called to be hers or to talk to women. I just know that I'm called to be who God's made me to be, and that is someone who's whole in every way. And so, yeah, so it was kind of a weird journey. Now it seems hilarious. Like, you know, I look fine. You know, I look like a 40-year-old woman. You know, like, it's actually kind of funny. Like, I'm like, oh, yeah, right, this is normal. But my perception and in my brain of what's normal is not normal. And so just giving that to God has been amazing. It's been an amazing journey, and it's been healed ever since. Like, it's funny. Like, insecurity, like, it's like something literally broke over me that day.
Wow.
And I haven't felt the same way again at all.
Yeah.
Like, I can watch stuff and not compare myself. I'm not, something broke in me, and I feel like all of that, like, you know, God never wastes anything. All of that huge journey, I don't think was meant to harm me, but it's been used for good. Then I would have a real conversation with my daughter who's being bullied at school because she's stunning, but she's got a monobrow and apparently fat thighs. She weighs like 30 kilos. And just put her in front of the mirror and say to her, Mina, you're beautiful, you're beautiful. And I wasn't able to do that before because I didn't believe it about myself. And so, yeah, so anyway, it's been a big journey, but yeah, I think in terms of just stripping back this identity thing, it's been really healing. My marriage, you know, Jake and I have so much better than we were. Like, it's just funny because I'm not comparing myself to every girl that walks down the street, you know, like it's just, yeah, it's free.
It's like
it's free.
you had the courage to face actually your biggest fear. You know, deeply rooted inside yourself was this biggest fear of, I will be rejected.
Yeah.
If people see the unadorned, undecorated version of me, then rejection is inevitable. And that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. And, you know, it goes both ways. You know, part of me not sharing that I had them in the first place was the fear of being rejected in my Christian community. The fear of, you know, if I come out, will people judge me for being, you know, because works both ways. You know, you looked, you know, I was talking to a girlfriend the other day who's absolutely stunning, and she was just sharing with me how she's been judged her whole life, that she's slutty or she's this or she's that, purely based off that she's just pretty, you know. And so that fear of both ways, that fear of, gee, we live in this society where it's not okay to be yourself. And so just tearing that back, and it's been really freeing. And yeah, no, you know, I'm not against them. I'm not making some kind of thing about it. But for me, I think it was so much deeper than that.
I think I was chatting with a previous guest, Susan Son, and we were talking about authenticity and vulnerability and presentation. And her point as a marketing executive and you know, professional at presenting things well, she said it's always about the why behind the what.
Yeah.
And the why is what determines whether or not it's a healthy or an unhealthy decision.
Yeah.
Really.
Right.
And interestingly, in this latest volume of stories, we have your story, and then we also have a story of a beautiful woman who had breast cancer and had her breasts removed, and said when she looked at her flattened, scarred chest was the first time in her life that she actually felt beautiful.
Wow.
Because of the bravery and the courage and the resilience that represented for her. And she went on to, you know, have reconstructive surgery.
Yeah.
But to me, it illustrates two very different experiences, but the same underlying value, which is it's what's driving the decision. What's the core revelation that we have about ourselves, and then we behave out of that. And I'm just so grateful to you for being so brave in your own life, but in sharing that with other people, because I know that anybody who hears this interview is going to be so empowered because of your vulnerability and openness. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I feel like it's a conversation that's going to sit with people and it's going to seep into the very inner part of us, about learning to love who we really are and standing up in the strength of, who God has made us to be, unashamedly so.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have just been a pioneer in that. And I would love you to sort of close out our conversation by just telling us a little bit more about Be Her Freedom, because it's been a tough season for everybody in every sense.
Yeah.
But when you're an events-driven advocacy and fundraising organisation, how are you pivoting? I believe
Yeah.
that's the word we're using this year.
The trending word, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. And how can people become more aware about what you're doing and join in some way supporting the cause?
Yeah, sure. I think this year again has just highlighted for me God's goodness in Be Hers. So I started this year. I think we did an event for International Women's Day. It was like a smaller. We'd been playing around with this idea of doing smaller gatherings, and maybe the week later, COVID happened, and so we
Mm.
kind of, it's like the last hurrah. So we had a beautiful picnic here and stuff, and but in some ways I was kind of preparing for it before I realized what was happening. And so we'd gone out last year. Again, we had launched Melbourne, and I was really sick in Melbourne. Like, I should not have been there. I got off the plane so sick. And it was amazing. But at the same time, just going, we need to actually think of something more sustainable. And so we had been planning these smaller events. We'd spent a year rebuilding our website, starting a social enterprise called Dream Free. And we had only sold a few things with Dream Free. Our biggest driver is events. And anyway, COVID happened and I was freaking out. So I shut down our office. I was like, we're going to have no money because we can't fundraise. What are we going to do? Literally just shut down everyone's email accounts even. So everyone went back to Gmail. There's no Be Her signature on anything. And
Wow.
was full on. And then just praying, and literally within the month, we raised more funds than we've ever raised before, within the month. We just had big donors come on board and fund us. And then within that month, the website that we had built, the social enterprise that we had started, one including a refugee sewing centre, which has been beautiful in our local state, it exploded. So I got a grant for that. And then online went nuts. And so all of a sudden we started selling Dream Free merchandise, and the merchandise is actually made by survivors in Cambodia. So we had been giving, every year we support the She Rescue Home and A21, and we give 100% of our profits to these organisations, but we wanted to do more. And so we had decided that we're going to start a clothing range and sell it at our events and sell it online, and then the profits would go back into rescuing another girl. So we would not only employ them, but we would rescue them and fund it that way. So within the month, all of a sudden, we were selling jumpers. So we're up to our 6th shipment of jumpers from Cambodia. Sewing centres were shutting down in Cambodia. Things weren't happening. And we were literally... And so, again, our pivot wasn't something that I had necessarily planned, but God had lined up for us in the season before. And so now this year, it's really exciting. We're building Dream Free. We've created freedom gatherings, so you can host your own freedom gathering wherever you are, because people all over the world keep messaging, seeing our Be Her Freedom events, wanting to join, and they haven't been able to. So we're launching these smaller events. We've got a campaign called Be Her Hero, where you can do a fun run or you can fundraise that way. But I mean, Be Her Freedom has always been an awareness campaign, and the funds in some ways have been secondary. The awareness, we've always believed, is what drives change. And so the funds will come. But to see Dream Free take off has just been such an exciting thing for me. And again, just testimony to God's goodness. I mean, I started this whole journey in fashion, and to see it all come aligned and work together for the greater good, and to know the women who are making these clothes, to see the impact that it's having. see girls, around Australia posting, and they're not just posting "love my jumper," they're posting human trafficking still exists. I didn't
Yep.
know about this until now. You can do something, and
Yep.
so it's been really, really cool. So yeah, Be Hers is basically an online movement for women. Anyone can be part of it. We are so open to every person from every walk of life. It is not just for one group of people, but you can basically raise your voice. You can use a lot of our online tools. You can purchase our merchandise, which gives back. You can donate direct to the cause. So 100% of your tax deductible donation goes directly to rescuing women and children. There's so many different things that you can do through it that I'm really excited about the new season with Dream Free in particular and what that looks like. Yeah,
That's
cool.
amazing, amazing. And for those who are late to join, I'm modeling a t-shirt. There it is. Not the most flattering angle, but after our previous conversation, it really doesn't matter what I look like. But you've got a range of amazing, beautiful quality, great messaging. I think we've all become much more aware of making our dollar count as much as it can. And so if you can be employing people, giving dignity and value to people with work and a purposeful endeavor, getting great quality items, sharing a message when you're walking around the street. I just think it's so many wins, and they're beautifully designed. And so thank you 1,000 times for putting your considerable talents and your gifts and your humble heart to a cause which is not just bringing freedom to women outside of our immediate community, but I think your personal message and the opportunity to be involved in what you've established with Be Her Freedom is actually impacting people just like me in suburban life, because we all are on our own battle to establish personal freedom. And the more we take hold of that ourselves, then the more we have to give into other people's stories. So thank you so much for being with me this morning. It's great to see your beautiful face, and I look forward to the border restrictions being lifted. It's because I had a trip to Tasmania booked and it's now been postponed, but I'm sure it will be worth the wait.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's so lovely chatting with you as always.
Oh, thanks, Mel. And if you want to read Mel's story, volume 2 of the She Is Project is available online. It's only $20. There are 25 incredible stories from women just like Melody. And it is a really beautiful thing that you're doing. And so I thank you. And I look forward to seeing you face to face soon in faith.
Definitely.
Bye, Mel.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.